Hi everyone, and thanks for being with me. This is day 7 of my 16 days of activism in order to talk about family violence, gender-based violence, and how it impacts all of us. Now, a lot of the conversation I've had today has been about how to work with men around this particular problem and to deal with just finding different ways to have discussions around emotions and how those emotions tend to govern the way we think and therefore control the way that we behave. Now, I'm going to talk today a little bit about a subject that's a little bit different, and that's about the impact that domestic violence has on children to some extent, and how that the notions that you get or the lessons that you get from witnessing or experiencing someone acting badly towards another person, particularly when you're a child and you're looking at the way your father may be treating your mother and how that may impact you. So in order to do this, I'm going to talk about emotional programming. Now, I'll discuss a little bit more about what that means in a moment, but it's important to understand that the messages that we've got from when we're growing up impact us greatly in terms of how we're going to perceive ourselves and how we're going to interact with the world around us. Children are particularly vulnerable. That, when you think about the way children absorb information as they're growing up, from the day they're born to the 8, 9, 10, and sometimes beyond that, they're gathering information about how to interpret their world, about how things taste and how things feel, and things like I've got a granddaughter who's 1, and she, as she learns to stand up, as she learns to be able to say no to things, as she learns a different way of dealing with her world, of exploring things that are different. This is what happens to children naturally. They enter this world with a blank slate. They start to interpret things based on what they see, feel, touch, smell, and taste. And this is what's important to them. So whatever they're going to be learning in those early parts of their lives are fundamental in terms of how they're going to experience their world. Now, there's an aspect of the brain, and I don't wish to be too biological about all of this, but there is an aspect of the brain called the amygdala, or amygdala, depending which one you want to use, which is the primitive part of the brain. And that is designed so that we can learn very early how to respond to anything that might appear to be a danger to us. So I used to explain this in my groups by walking up to someone and just slapping my hand in front of them and watching them jump. And I'd say to them, well, you didn't have to think about that, did you? It's an immediate response. And the amygdala functions through our spinal cord, our nervous system, and it causes our body to respond automatically to events. Now, the amygdala is known as the primitive part of the brain because it's formed in utero, and it also means then that from the beginning of life, we're responding to things that are immediate, and it's there to protect us. And children have that, obviously, and they do respond to it. They are unable to articulate what it is. So when a person yells or screams or shouts or does something that causes the child to be fearful, they will respond automatically to that by hiding, by jumping, by shuddering, the body will respond to it in a way which is about protecting them. And also, we must remember, and I've had many conversations with young men, or men generally, about this, and that is that there were many occasions where growing up in a violent environment, kids will often feel that they need to protect the person being abused. And in order to do that, some people have told me they stand in front of, between the mum and the dad, that they feel responsible, that sometimes the violence they believe has been caused because of what they have done. So they take on the role of not only protector, but of the party that feels guilty for whatever is happening. And that impact of all of that affects the way that you view yourself and how you might interpret your world from that moment on. So it's important, I think, to understand emotional programming. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. And hopefully you will understand what I mean as I talk more about this. Now, this is a well-known psychological fact. It's been well researched. This is not me just rambling on about something I discovered on the internet and hopefully it fits. No, it isn't. It's a real thing, and so we need to take it seriously. But there are really some important messages that are provided for us when discussing this. So what is emotional programming? Well, your emotional programming is simply a set of decisions and beliefs you made about yourself, others, and the world in general when you were growing up. And it's important to remember that. This is about when decisions are made, how we define ourselves and the other people in our world when we were growing up. So at what stages does this actually impact us? So between birth and 5 years of age, we receive 50% of our emotional programming. So how we're going to choose to respond to our world is determined by the time we're 5. So we need to think about a little bit about, I think, what does that mean? What does it mean to you when you were growing up? What lessons did you learn when you were 5? How did your parents treat you? How do you treat the kids that you've had during that period of their lives? And whether or not that youth belief has affected them or disadvantaged them in some particular way, whether what you've done has provided a deficit in terms of how they view themselves, a negative response to how they now see themselves. And if violence is present, then I can assure you that the way that they view their life has been determined at this point, at this early stage, by at least 50%. So between 5 and 8 years of age, you receive 30% of our programming. Between 5 and 8, that's an additional 30%. So if you do the maths, that's by the time we're 8, we're 80% programmed psychologically. And this means that we're psychologically programmed as to how we're going to interpret our world. So whether we're confident and self-assured, or whether we are doubtful and have low self-esteem, is particularly going to be determined by the time we're 8, to the tune of 80%. Between the ages of 8 and 18, we receive 15% more of our emotional programming. We need to remember that at this particular point, a lot of our programming is determined by the interactions we have with our peers, how we see ourselves, social media in particular, and how that's going to determine the version that we're constructing of who we are. So that means that by the time you reach adulthood, you're 95% programmed. Now, I need to say that there are, when I would talk to groups about this, there'd be a sort of a response of sadness to think that I'm now programmed to the tune of 95% by the time I reach 18. So what does this mean? So it seems hopeless that I have not had control of my life up until this point. Other people's have controlled me, particularly between the ages of 0 and 8, and now I'm lost. Well, I hasten to add that there is good news. It is with the 5% of our conscious mind that we can understand and change the other 95%. So the point is that when we look back on all of this and we think about who we are and how we've been constructed, we can then do the work in order to change that. So men who are violent and abusive can look back at their childhood and not necessarily go into blame mode, but certainly start to take responsibility for the way they've chosen to behave. And also, I think it's important to understand how they might have chosen to behave based on the experiences they received from their parents and the messages that they got, and to redefine who they are separate from the negative messages that they've received. It is a truism, in fact, that we can tell a child 2,000 times how wonderful they are, how great they are. We can praise them as much as we like. But once we say something negative to them, it's the negativeness that they will remember. And one of the most annoying words that I think I need to discuss with you the most is using the word, for a parent to use the word disappointed, that I'm disappointed in you, is extremely damaging. Children want to be acknowledged by, they want to be supported by their parent. They need to have positive affirmations. It doesn't mean that you have to give them positive messages, build them up all the time. It means that we need to find ways to have discussions with children that are more about, I really appreciate what you did, that was good. What do you think you might be able to do that would be a little bit better than that? How could you improve upon that? As opposed to saying, well, that was crap, you performed really badly. I've had stories with young men who have been told by their parents after a football match, they've been continually criticised for what they did. And that has been harmful to them. It's destroyed their self-esteem. They're doing something they enjoy doing, but they can never do it well enough for their father. That destroys their sense of self. So through emotional programming, we can at least understand that 0 to 8 were critical years, because 80% of who we are and how we defined the world and the relationships we choose to have with others, particularly our partners, can be based on those first 8 years of our lives. It's worth reflecting. So think about those 8 years. What did they mean to you? How did they help you to define who you are? And, the other thing too to look at, I think, is when you were growing up, is thinking about that 80%, and then you're thinking about 8 to 14 or 15, and then you think about, well, who else impacted me? And often it can be teachers who can give us positive messages about who we are, who support us through certain aspects of our lives. They see our talents and our abilities, and they support us around that. And then it can be peers. And there can be some supportive aspects of having peers that support you, of course, but it also can be negative. So it's important to sieve through all of that stuff and to look for ways to reconstruct, to develop a different narrative, if you like, about who we are and who we would like to be, particularly as according to this subject that we're raising, which is about domestic violence, is to redefine who you want to be, because you've got the 5% in which you can use to do that. Thanks everybody for being with me. Just remember also to subscribe to my channel, to ring the bell for further notifications, because I'll have more of these particular conversations to come. Thank you very much. Take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.